Well then, after the video where I gave my first impression on the tanks in Shadowlands over a month ago, and my video where I compared what they gained and what they lost compared to BFA, now it's time to give them a proper rating, a ranking, a chart, a tier list, call it whatever. I don't care. I've done it for the DPS, so now it's time for tanks, and after this it will be time for healers. Now, different activities require different priorities. How much damage does a tank do is more important in Mythic Plus. How strong the defensives are. To sustain very short bursts of heavy damage is also extremely important in raid environments. How about their self-sustain? How self-reliant they are. As you know, damage is extremely important in Mythic Plus, not just for tanks but for healers too, which means the more self-sufficient a tank is, the more time he will leave the healer to DPS. We take this, we put this all together, and we will come out with some rank. Let's start with Brewmaster Monk. Brewmaster Monk has received many positive changes coming into Shadowlands. Brewmaster Monk no longer has the boring maintenance active of Iron Skin Brew. It has now been cooked into a passive, Shuffle, double your effectiveness of Stagger, extremely simple to keep up at all times. And now your new active brew is going to be Celestial Brew, which is a guard on steroids. This is very positive for monks, because now they have way more self-reliance compared to before. Now they have a way to sort of defend themselves after the enemies have got them through their Stagger. Before they were completely helpless, now they have Absorb in Celestial Brew, and they have also a hefty heal in the reworked Expel Harm. If you stack up enough orbs, it can be a pretty significant heal that can help you being more self-sufficient. Other additional nice changes, their Touch of Death, giving them a way to reset their Stagger. Specifically in Mythic Plus is pretty easy to use. Clash can be used as an extra interrupt. Those were all nice baseline additions. When it comes to raids, Brewmaster remains pretty easily as S tier. They were S tier before in BFA, they haven't lost anything that made them S tier, and in fact they gain more things. So they stay pretty easily in S tier. The most important thing as a tank when you are raiding is how hard it is for you to die. Why? Because tanks are limited. You have limited time to progress. What you want to do first and foremost as a tank in a raid is to not die and to let your raid group progress the encounter. The least you die as a tank, the more that's gonna happen. And it just so happens that the easiest tank to do this with is Brewmaster. They are the most defensive. It is the easiest to heal through when you're undergeared, when you're being whacked for way more damage than you're gonna be in a few item levels. It is going to give a way easier time to your healers, specifically at the release of an expansion, at the release of a tier, to heal through. When it comes to Mythic Plus, on the other hand, things turn around a bit, because in Mythic Plus we come into Brewmaster Monk's main problem, which is damage. Brewmaster Monk has shit damage. Brewmaster Monk ends up in B tier in Mythic Plus because they have S tier defense, just like Raid, but D tier damage. They have very few abilities to do AoE. Their Keg Smash, their talented Rushing Jadewind and their Breath of Fire do very little. Their Spinning Crane Kick filler is also very poor. They just don't have a way to do damage. They also don't have big cooldowns that they can use to amplify their damage, like an Avenging Wrath for a Paladin or a Metamorphosis for a Demon Hunter. They're just way too naked when it comes to sheer damage. They do still have utilities. The Ring of Peace, the Paralysis, the AoE Stun, the Dispel as a hybrid class, they all feel, but it's not enough to make up for the lack of damage. We have seen how important damage is in Mythic Plus. We have seen how classes can completely turn over their value in a Mythic Plus key purely because of their insane damage, and right now Brewmaster just lacks too much of it. Staying in B tier, despite their complete lack of damage, is just a testament to how strong they are defensively. The ideal Demon Hunter is going to gain a lot of defensive thanks to their healing, because their current active mitigation is just about the worst of any other tank, probably only matched by Frenzied Region of Guardian Druid. Demon Spikes is terrible. It does too little for the cooldown it has, and it leaves Demon Hunter way too open to taking damage. In Mythic Plus, for now, at lower keys and lower gear, it is working out because of their insane damage. They have Spirit Bomb, which is going to tag enemies with Frailty, essentially lifesteal. This means the more damage you have, the more defensive you have as a Demon Hunter. Their Soul Cleave is AoE, their Immolation Aura is AoE, their Fell Devastation is AoE, their Spirit Bomb is AoE, their Infernal Strike is AoE, and their Sigil of Flame is AoE. This means whenever they tag a group of mobs with Spirit Bomb, they can lifesteal everything. The more targets, the more damage, the more damage, the more lifesteal, the more lifesteal, the more tankiness. This works just fine in Mythic Plus, and in raids it is a disaster. When it comes to raids, bosses ain't got time for that shit. Bosses only care about big beefy defensives, which is what Demon Hunter doesn't have. Metamorphosis is big and beefy, but it has a 3-minute cooldown, which is too much and too long. It has also been nerfed. Their uptime, their demonic duration, nerfed as well. They only have Fiery Brand as only other pseudo-defensive. This creates a pretty obvious and clear divide. When it comes to Mythic Plus, they are in a reverse Brewmaster situation. Instead of having S tier defense and D tier damage, they have S tier damage and D tier defense, which slots them at B tier. More coordinated groups can use the Demon Hunter even to A plus efficiency because their damage right now is super strong, but it seems more likely they are destined to end up like BFA, where they were super popular at the start because of their high damage and not too much of a high damage intake in the lower keys of Mythic Plus, and the more we scaled upwards, the lower Vengeance was effective at. When it comes to raids, they drop down to D tier. The damage spikes are too high, they have too few defensives, and their strongest defense is heal by doing damage to multiple enemies, which is not that useful and viable in raids. Also, I mentioned this for Brewmaster, so I have to mention this for Vengeance as well. Raids right now, it means progression. It means new expansion, new raid, new progression. You will be undergeared, you will be understated, you will be taking even more damage than usual, so you want to be even more safe when it comes to defense, and that's not something Vengeance Demon Hunter likes to do. So that's where they sit in raids. Do you ever get the feeling that Prot Paladin for the last few expansions has been in this limbo, where they are always the almost quite not totally best of the tanks, and they always have one spec above them in whatever they try to be best at? The best defensive tank, the best offensive tank, the best self-healing tank, there's always been someone above them. I think in Shadowlands they might change this community perspective. They have gotten reworked with Holy Power. Now they spend Holy Power to use their defensive, Active Mitigation, Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory. This has made them significantly better and more well-rounded. Before, Light of the Protector, their heal, was gated by a cooldown, and so was Shield of the Righteous. Even if you take a end of expansion super roided up overpowered Prot Paladin, their cooldowns reduced by haste are still going to be longer than what it takes current Paladin to generate the Holy Power needed to use their Active Mitigation. If you then add in the free Holy Power and the free cost spenders that they can generate with their legendaries or their talents, it makes them very effective. They have retained all of the things they had before. Their Mega Cheese possibilities with their blessings and their own shield, as well as their utility. They have remained on a similar level when it came to smooth damage intake because of their mastery, simply flat out reducing the damage taken. The reworked Blessed Hammer or Holy Shield are very good for both physical or magical damage. Their burst damage, again, as I mentioned, Brewmaster not having a burst as a cooldown, Prot Paladin does use its own Avenging Wrath cooldown to also do more damage rather than just defensively, which is very powerful for Mythic Plus. They have several combinations between legendaries and talents that can make them very strong and very durable in either situation, AoE or single target, when it comes to tanking. But when it comes to Mythic Plus, they are A tier. I think they are A plus even if you consider their current damage, possibly overtuned. Between the utility that they have, the cheese possibilities in a Mythic Plus key with their immunities, the current damage that they have, and the much better sustained damage intake that they have, thanks to their Holy Power generation and the way they can smooth out the damage they take, and the fact that they do have a proper option between defense for physical damage in armor from Shield of the Righteous or heal from Word of Glory, an actual heal, not the piece of shit Frenzy's Regen. It makes them very versatile and very strong. And when it comes to raids, they are also A tier for just about the same reasons. Their damage output has less value in a raid, but none of the other things they were good at lose value because there are less targets. They can talent out of what made them strong in AoE situations and focus more on single target, unlike Demon Hunter, whose core rotation is around hitting more targets. So hopefully this expansion is the right one to say bright days ahead for Prot Paladin. I hope 2 months from now or 3 months from now we will not be seeing again Prot Paladin being the third best or the second best at something, but being properly considered high tier, at least in a few niches, but we'll have to see. I already went in at length in what the problems were of Prot Warrior coming into Shadowlands. This was a month ago. There has been like 4 balance changes, balance patches, and nothing has changed. The fact that they lost way too many borrowed powers that made them viable in BFA, people sort of ignored this issue because Prot Warrior was catapulted into SS tier overnight, so nobody minded. But now that that's lost, it becomes a problem. They have now a lot of their strong talents, guaranteed always pick talents from BFA, jumbled into the same row, gutting them completely, Unstoppable Force and Into the Fray, and Anger Management and Bolster. You're gonna have to lose 2 of them now. Their Azurite traits, obviously, completely gone, not even replaced by legendaries or anything. This creates this problem where their whole infinite cycle of Thunderclap, huge damage, infinite rage regen, to use Ignore Pain, to be extremely tanky, rinse and repeat is no longer possible, and this leaves them in huge problems, to the point that you have to start hoping for Borrowed Powers to bail you out, at least in some activities, and even those have been nerfed. The Mass Spell Reflection, Legendary, Misshape and Mirror has been nerfed. Their Covenant, turns out, is not raid-wide, it's only party-wide, so the cuckshed of being a utility tank with your Covenant is gone as well, so this doesn't leave them a lot. When it comes to Mythic Plus, they go all the way down to D tier. They were catapulted into S tier because of their damage, which then fueled their defensive. Now this is gone, so they have way too little left to be very strong in Mythic Plus. And when it comes to raids, they go into C tier, above Vengeance Demon Hunter. As I mentioned, one of the problems of Vengeance when it comes to raid tanking is the lack of big cooldowns, is the fact that raid bosses don't give a shit about your cute self-healing in AoE situations. They want big beefy CDs. And the reason why Prot is above Vengeance is because they do have big beefy CDs at the very least. 50% damage reduction on your shield wall, 30% max HP, which is also very strong in a raid encounter, more so than in Mythic Plus. On their last stand, 20% on their Demo Shout, as well as Battle Shout and Rallying Cry, just makes them way more valuable in a raid environment compared to a Vengeance Demon Hunter, but that is not saying much. So, at least for now, this is the price you have to pay for creating a broken, dysfunctional spec at the start of BFA, not fixing it, and giving it band-aids to make it work, and then stripping them all out at the start of a new expansion without giving them anything in return. So, sad days ahead for Plot Warrior. When Guardian Druid was a kid, he said, "Growing up, I want to become like a Brewmaster Monk." His wish was fulfilled, but unfortunately, the only thing he took from a Brewmaster Monk was the damage. Guardian Druid does fuck all damage. On top of being mind-numbingly boring because it's just spam, swipe and refresh trash every 6 seconds for AoE, it's just too little. It's not enough. It's not even a Prot Warrior that is boring but at least is super high, spamming Thunderclap. So that's the first issue and crutch of Guardian Druid when it comes to Mythic Plus. The other problem they have, maybe you have realized this, I might have mentioned this once or twice in this video, Frenzied Regen is a trash active mitigation. 24% healing over time on a 36-second cooldown is a tragedy. This makes them way less self-sufficient and self-reliant when it comes to magical damage in Mythic Plus. This alone is enough to put them in C tier. You never want to be in a situation in Mythic Plus where your tank does low damage and is asking a lot of the healer. You either want low damage like a monk, but at least very low damage taken, or you want very high damage done like a Vengeance Demon Hunter, that in return asks a little bit more from their healer. Guardian Druid takes the worst of both worlds. Low damage and higher damage taken. It's not very good. When it comes to raids, they are better. I put them in B tier because honestly, their big beefy defensives have spread now. They are way more effective. They have the currently strongest legendary in the game for tanks, purely from a statistical perspective. Numbers perspective, the Natural Order's Will is going to make your Barkskin have a 35% damage reduction. When you take Survival of the Fittest, your Barkskin has a 40-second cooldown, so you will have a 35% damage reduction for 12 seconds on a 40-second cooldown. And Barkskin is going to give you Frenzied Regen and Iron Fur on start of Barkskin and end of Barkskin, which is insanely good, especially when you consider Frenzied Regen as 2 charges on a 36-second cooldown, and this legendary is giving you 2 of them for free every 40 seconds. Their Pulverize has been reworked to be 20% damage reduction for 10 seconds on a 30-second cooldown is very strong. Their Incarnation has been reworked. Now, on top of giving you a free last stand from a warrior, 30% max HP, you still gain the same bonuses from Berserk. Your Survival Instincts has gone from a 4-minute cooldown to a 3-minute cooldown. Overall, in general, they just have way more defensives, way more beefy, chunky defensives to use in a raid during a very high spike of damage. Iron Fur is also easier to set up in a raid environment where you can tank and off-tank. pool your rage and then dump your rage in Iron for stacks. It's a little bit harder to use in Mythic Plus where you're taking consistent and constant damage. So overall, this is a pretty simple split. They are not self-sufficient enough while also doing too little damage when it comes to Mythic Plus, and they have gotten more strong defensives to be more valuable in a raid environment. And lastly, we have Blood Decay. Spoiler, Blood Decay is the best tank in the expansion. There you go, you can leave now. Blood Decay is the best tank on the expansion because they have lost nothing compared to BFA and they have only gained more, and they already were the more well-rounded of the tanks. One of the strongest changes of any class in the game has been Anti-Magic Zone. This is going to be a mandatory external raid cooldown that at least one DK will be guaranteed to have a raid spot in Shadowlands, and Blood DK having it as a tank is extremely valuable. It's gonna help in raids, obviously it's also gonna help in Mythic Plus. Those poor, helpless, low defensive specs that can start to get one-shot at high keys can get bailed out by an anti-magic zone now. And not just them, but the entire party can sit in the anti-magic zone. They have been given Ossuary as a baseline passive, very strong Ossuary, to give you your necessary runic power for your triple spam of Death Strike. When it comes to Mythic Plus, they are an easy S tier, based on what I just mentioned of all the other tanks. Their damage is higher than Brewmaster and higher than Guardian, especially with Swarming Mist Covenant ability. They have actually pretty strong damage, not as strong as Paladin and Vengeance, but still very respectable. But the fact that they have Anti-Magic Zone, they have Mass Grip in Mythic Plus, they have a Battle Res as a tank in Mythic Plus, Control Undead is also worth to be mentioned. When it comes to this expansion, with quite a few undead enemies, their defensives are still very varied. I mentioned other tanks having crippling problems with their active mitigation. Either Frenzied Region not healing enough, or Demon Spikes being too little armor gain. DK as one of the strongest, because Bone Shield is constantly active. Once you keep your stacks up, it's always gonna be there. It's never gonna be on a cooldown or be missing. And then Death Strike is massive amount of healing, the most healing of all tanks. And this is compounded by Lichborn being baseline and now giving you 10% leech. Icebound Fortitude for a 30% DR. Anti-Magic Shell for magical damage tank, Dancing Rune Weapon for the parry chance, and Vampiric Blood for a 1.5 minute cooldown last stand. It just makes them the more complete tank between their damage done and their damage taken and their survivability. As I mentioned, the importance of the self-reliance in Mythic Plus, allowing your healer to DPS, to not be worried too much about you, is very important in Mythic Plus, and Death Knight is easily the easiest when it comes to this in Mythic Plus. So comfortable and easy S tier for Mythic Plus. When it comes to raids, they are also S tier. I debated if putting them closer or not to Brewmaster, but they are definitely better than all the other tanks. So they match Brewmaster for a similar reason when it comes to self-reliance. This also has to do with the ease in staying alive. Brewmaster can stay alive in raids because they take very little damage in big spikes that prevents them from dying very quickly, not giving healers time to react. And for Blood DK, what is going to give healers time to react is the fact that they can heal themselves. And just in case, they also have a cheat death mechanic if they want to. So this is for the same reason of a Brewmaster Monk. Blood DK is a very good triage tank. It's a very good start of progression, start of expansion, low gear type of tank that helps you scale up by being able to survive things that other tanks usually just get pounded for too much damage for. And Blood DK can just get away with it because of their self-healing and partially cheat death mechanic. And if it wasn't enough to match Brewmaster in terms of pure defensives, they still have Anti-Magic Zone for raids, and they have the Anti-Magic Zone plus Anti-Magic Shell for very strong magical damage defensive mechanism, which Brewmaster is a little bit weaker at. So all in all, Blood DK is the most versatile, complete and strongest tanks all around for Shadowlands. And with this, we are done with the rating of the tanks from Mythic Plus and raids. My original first impression that I did over a month ago, when I looked them over, without giving them a specific rating in general, I had Blood DK rising up the ranks above Brewmaster, particularly Mythic Plus, Prot Paladin rising up above the ranks in Mythic Plus, together with Vengeance Demon Hunter due to their damage, Guardian Druid rising up in tank for raid environments due to their buffs, particularly to their defensives, and Prot Warrior just remaining there in their misery at the bottom. So, with this, I'll leave you guys, and because this is going to be about my next tank video, let me know which tank is the most fun to you, because obviously the fun rating is gonna come in and some of these things are gonna be flipped over. So I'm interested in knowing which one do you consider the most fun. In the meantime, I'm going to go and close my window because it's fucking cold in here.